Good morning. I am Jessie Whittish with Kentucky Youth Advocates, and it is really great to see all of you, especially if you have like someone do an NTI at the other end of your table today or in another room. And I really appreciate that you have made time for this morning. So we're very excited to hear from today's panelists around the trauma of this, what we're calling a dual pandemic. We're recording today's forum to share later as a video and as a podcast. So we ask that you stay muted, but please feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat. And panelists, if you all want to address those in the chat, you can. But if not, we'll try and get to them, or we'll try and address them after the fact one in subsequent forums. So again, good to see all of you that are here for the first time. Good to see all of you who are here for the umpteenth time. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Terry Brooks to get us going.
Yeah, well, good morning, Jessie. As always, we want to say thanks for taking time to join us today. As always, we want to say for those of you who are darn close to regular attendance pins, we love seeing you. We also love seeing folks who are on this call for the very first time. Before we get into the topic at hand, I want to just make a flat out appeal to you. We have spent the last 2 weeks talking about the federal response, the next federal response to the COVID situation. What I will tell you is that the optimism that we heard from Leader McConnell's office and the optimism we heard from Congressman Yarmouth's office, or from Congressman Yarmouth last week, what we're perceiving coming out, especially of the Senate, would suggest that that optimism was not well founded. And what we're seeing coming out is absolutely devastating proposal. Apparently, the U.S. Senate has amnesia when it comes to kids and families. So, Jessie, we're going to do a little interaction here. I'm not sure when or what we are going to post, but I would expect there to be some guidance on KYA's website for you as to what we see as the issues coming out. I would say that the only folks on this call who need to be concerned, so I want to be really candid, only if you are concerned with K-12, child care, juvenile justice, child welfare, or family economics. If you those are the only issues that are not addressed in what's coming out. I just want to remind you that this is a forum for advocates. And what that means is that all of us have 2 U.S. senators and all of us have 1 member of the House of Representatives. So I really want to be very direct and just very upfront in encouraging you to call those 3 people or email or however you want to do that. And you just make sure that they know that you're part of a group of folks who are going to hold Washington, both sides, both the House and the Senate, responsible for putting forth a sustainable and appropriate next response to COVID. I, for one, especially in certain sectors like childcare and K-12, see this not as some minor issue to address. If we don't get this right, autumn and winter for kids in Kentucky and families in Kentucky, it's going to be a very bad autumn and winter. And we got one shot, folks, because I don't know if you noticed, but there is an election coming up. And so I'm just guessing that the later in the fall things go, the less chance we have of additional measures. So, from my perspective, a little bit of an amateur perspective, I'm going to say that we've got one more shot for something tangible before Election Day. And I just want to really, really push all of you, and myself included, make sure that you're speaking out. We can't commiserate after the fact. we've got to advocate before the fact. So that's my sermon, Jesse. And now I'll move to the topic at hand. So we know, as Jesse said, that if you're a mom or dad, or frankly a grandma or grandpa taking care of the more than 100,000 kids in Kentucky who live in kinship care, or a foster parent, if you're responsible for a little boy or a little girl, man, you're just facing issues that we could not have dreamed of. COVID, the recognition finally, and the consequences thereof of racial injustice, as well as the pressures of economics. I mean, this is coming together, and I know that tsunami is an overused phrase in political circles, but this is a tsunami of first degree. And so I just wanted to say that we want to try to support folks in these forums. We also want to hear from you. We were kind of frankly talking before the formal broadcast started a little bit about MTI, which produced Jesse's opening question. And, the only way we really know what's going on is if y'all let us know. We know there is bad news in many ways for kids and families. I think there is some tantalizing opportunities, but we don't know if those are going to happen. Now, I'll give you a good example. There is a concept called expanded care, and it opens up major health opportunities and supports, especially behavioral and mental health supports for kids and families through federal support that can be administered through schools. I mean, what a great way to actually leverage NTI. We have no idea whether that is going to be fully utilized or just kind of put on the back shelf. If it is utilized, it's a great opportunity. If it's not, it's a lost opportunity. Many of you were involved in the really important piece of legislation around school safety 2 years ago. That also provided significant mental health supports for kids. And we all know that along with reading, writing, and arithmetic, that your first grader or eighth grader or 12th grader is experiencing primary and secondary and tertiary trauma right now. So again, there are resources on the table if they're leveraged. And if they're not, they may as well not exist. So what I would want you to take away from KYA's lens is we recognize that it's going to be tough in the best of situations, but there are very tangible, palpable, realistic ways to support families. And some of those are out of Frankfurt, and some of those are out of groups that are represented on the call today, community groups and faith groups and neighbors. And so that's what we want to do, is to have a little bit of a discussion today from folks who know their stuff, who have a pulse on their respective communities, and give you kind of a sense of where things stand. I hope that what we get to also, no pressure panelist or Shannon, but I also want us to get to the point of making sure everybody knows opportunities. And again, that may mean you putting some heat on your local school district as to what are you doing on expanded health, or it may be celebrating those schools that are doing a good job. So we want to be even-handed on this, but we want you to be aware of what supports can be there as you're fighting it every day in ways large and small. So facilitating the conversation today is Shannon Moody. And Shannon handles, she's sort of in charge of innovation and strategic initiatives at KYA. So that's only a 1 million mile portfolio. So Shannon, we appreciate you kind of leading the discussion. So take it away.
Thank you, Terry. I'm really excited about the panel today because it covers a lot of the work that I am engaged in when it comes to either child abuse prevention or trauma mitigation and prevention, and the panelists that we have are fantastic. So we're going to jump right in and start with really brief introductions, and then we'll give an opportunity for folks to talk a little bit about what they do in their respective roles, and then jump into the questions. So we have Raine Minichan, who is the coordinator of Extended School Services, Guidance, and School Mental Health Services with Fayette County Public Schools. We have Ebony O'Rea, who is a trainer with the Bounce Coalition and interim executive director of Nativity Academy. And then also Dr. Kish Cumi Price, who is the director of education policy and programming at Louisville Urban League. So let's start with Dr. Kish Cumi Price, and just if you want to give a little bit of background on what you do at the Urban League.
Yes, hi everyone. So I'm the director of ed policy and programming at the Louisville Urban League, and just about a year into the role now. And a lot of our focus as of the past, 5 or 6 months has been around advocating for Black and Brown youth, specifically around what NTI was going to look like for our students, and really trying to push the district to think broadly, more broadly, about race equity and how the district is prepared to address some of those issues. So a lot of my energy has been around that, specifically also around mental health awareness, and really trying to ensure that staff and administrators were prepared for as best as they could be anyway. For some of the, I guess we would say, high concerns that we had around just where students would be, right? Where their baseline is starting school, given that we're in not just in the midst of a pandemic, but we're also dealing with a lot of racial tension, a lot of displaced anger, a lot of homicides that are happening, and some impacting youth in ways that we would never know. And so we've been really trying to engage those conversations, also reaching out about, so what happens with those students who were never reached during the March through May period of time, what strategic plans are in place to address those issues. So it's been a lot of conversation, pushing, talking with all of the people that may be able to make impact there. We've also been very heavily involved with the Evolve 502 Rapid Response Team, which is a coordinated effort throughout the city to try to respond to these issues in a more collective fashion. So community learning hubs and supporting students in that way. We've been helping to push those initiatives forward. So that's been the majority of my role thus far, is really just advocacy and raising the level of awareness, because we know that if our community understands the various issues that are being discussed and how things may play out, then it gives a little more power and influence to parents and community partners to be able to support our students. So I guess I'll wrap there.
So you are, you're staying busy. I think it's fair to say that you have not had a lot of free time. Ebony, I think that's probably true for you as well. And you are also no stranger to advocacy. Can you tell us a little bit about both your roles at Bounce and Nativity Academy?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Ebony O'Rea, and I wear many of hats. It's good to be with you all this morning, and so I'll try to be specific, as Shannon has alluded, to talk about my role with Bounce and my role with Nativity Academy. And so I am a trained facilitator with the Bounce Coalition. We do go deeper into adverse childhood experiences and trauma that affects young people and adults, right? Because the trauma is ongoing, and sometimes that shows up in various ways. And so with Bounce, we are continuously trying to improve ways in which we can educate people about trauma and what that does to the young minds, as well as to, adults and the communities in which we live and have to function with one another. So it's been a great opportunity, a great training to have for staff members who are working with I would say we're all traumatized, quite honestly, but to work with traumatized younger people so that we are not re-traumatizing them, right? And so that we have the tools that help mitigate some of that and support them in ways that make sense to them and their families. And so my newly appointed role of the interim executive director at Nativity, in my mind, it is still all the same, making sure that there is equity in education, equity in the lives of Black and Brown students. If you don't know a lot about Nativity Academy, we are an independent private middle school that serves predominantly African American and some Hispanic students. And so we know where our families are coming from. We know where they're going back to. And so to make sure that we're doing what we can do to support those students and those families is our top priority. And of course, you know, during COVID, making sure that they're safe, making sure that we're adhering to guidelines. And as I said, not re-traumatizing folks, because this pandemic is traumatizing, period. And so happy to be with you guys. And it's really cool. I just will go ahead and say it's really cool to be on this panel. Dr. Cumi Price and I, we work well together. I'm a community organizer at heart. And so the things that we get to do to push on systems who may not necessarily have an equity lens on some of the work that they're doing is extremely rewarding. And I think it's a gap that needs to be filled. We have to pay a little bit more attention about how the decisions that we're making trickle all the way down to these students who are going to experience an education gap. Period. And so for us to be able to continue to insert ourselves and making sure that equity is at the, at least seated at the table, then that is what, so much as my friend has said, that's what's taking up a lot of our capacity at the moment, is just making sure that our kids have access to quality education by any means necessary.
Thank you. And I think and would guess that Rainie is also focused on that gap in services and gap in meeting the needs of students as well. And Rainie, do you want to talk a little bit about your role at Fayette County Public Schools?
Sure. So my role it's kind of 3 different hats as well. But I think the thing that has kept me the busiest is the mental health services aspect of my job. So helping to ensure that we are maintaining a connection with our community mental health partners. But we also, before the Expanded Care Act, we had already passed an increase in property taxes. And through that, we're able to hire, we're now at 57 mental health specialists. So all of our schools in the district, in addition to any pre-existing services, you know, school counselors, social workers, psychologists, they now have a mental health specialist in their building. And that group of individuals, we've then divided into, they're obviously practicing direct practice. We're working to get further telehealth training so they can be more effective, because I think during that March through May period, just like the teachers, it was like, holy cow, I don't know how to do this across the screen. So we're working on training for that, but we've also divided them into subgroups, one of which is really working on how do we address equity issues in our schools from a mental health perspective. One is about trauma-informed care, et cetera. So we're really trying to structure a comprehensive school mental health program, but it's still young. We are just a year and a half into having the district mental health specialist, and last semester I hardly can count because it was just so disjointed after March. But one of the big things we've done over the summer is develop training materials for every staff member to complete trauma-informed care training with some specific information about the potential impact of COVID-19 on our students, their families, but also on our staff, and really emphasizing, you know, care for self, but also the ability to, you know, here are ways to connect students with whom you're concerned with services that they need. We've also developed a parent referral system that's online. So rather than the parent having to figure out, who do I call at my school because I'm worried about my kid, it's just a one-stop shop, and they can just put in the information and it will go to the appropriate people to then follow up for basic needs or social and emotional concerns. All of our administrators have received a half day of training specific to supporting students, their families, and staff as we re-enter school, related to trauma and the impact of COVID-19 as well. So that has been the big part of how I've spent the past several months. We still have things, work to go, but we, it's just, as everyone has experienced, has turned our world upside down. So.
Yeah, you hear the word unprecedented. This is it though. So a lot of you talked about mitigating the effects of trauma or ensuring that the folks that you work with are trauma informed, but tell us about how trauma is showing up in kids and families as a result of COVID and the rising calls for racial justice. I mean, this is really a dual pandemic. Who's particularly at risk? So that Rainie, Kish, Ebony, that's for anyone.
I mean, I guess I would say that it's, we're not working on something that happened and we're trying to get over it. It keeps on happening like daily. And then you get a dose of, I can't take this anymore, right? And so that continues to happen. So it's very difficult to say that you're ever in a great spot, as a child or as a caregiver. And so, I mean, just to think about what's happened in this past, 5 days or a week, okay, so we're dealing with something that we know we're all in this space of saying this reckoning, right? Where it's nationwide, coming to terms with where you stand and who you stand with and how you're going to use your power to advocate for Black and brown people, Black Lives Matter, all of that. What does that mean? Is that, political? What is it? But then you have the very real issue of, I'm seeing how my people are getting treated daily. I'm seeing that it's okay for a police officer to shoot a man in his back 7 times with his kids in the car. My kids see that stuff. Our kids see that. And then we have to explain it. Like, you can't explain that. And so it is beyond to, and then have to be in a mental state to turn on for work and for school and for all the things to keep you alive. So it is, to me, I believe that it is highly disturbing to be alive as a Black person right now. And that's all the years that predate us as well, right? But I can only hope that we're moving in a direction where it can't be denied any longer, so that systems are changing and remain in a space where there's a collective effort that this isn't some wave that we get over and then we're on to, business as usual. So whatever it is that is required for that to happen, that is what I am in full support of and what my prayers are directed toward, because this is difficult. It is hard. It is annoying to have conversations with your kids and asking those questions about, well, how do you feel about what it means for you to be a Black boy in the school system? Like, how do you feel about that? And for every single one of the kids that I've talked to, mine in particular, we know we have to be better. We have to be better. We have to do better than everybody else in order for us to matter. And I should also share that one of the things that I think we all should be prepared for with NTI is understanding that some of the treatment that our kids have experienced in the past that we were not necessarily aware of is coming into our homes. So yes, I know that there's been a lot of training for teachers and administrators around, you know, these are the times that we're in, addressing your implicit biases and all of that. That doesn't, you don't check the box and now you're done and you got your certificate, right? That is work that has to just continually happen. It's hard work, right? And so how I show up in a space, I bring all of that with me. So that energy, like I can feel that just in the other, I'm in the other room. That's probably why you guys couldn't hear me, where my kids are in the room behind me. But I can hear the tone inflections. I can hear when you're talking to one student and then you talk to my son, and then I hear how you change that. I can see, you know, and so these are things that we're really going to have to be prepared for. Me as a mom and you know, an educator, all of that, I understand that this is not, we're not trying to put anybody under a microscope. My point is, though, the reality is hitting us in the face, right? And so we're going to have to be prepared to have these awakenings, and also to deal with our stuff, right? Like some of this is going to have to be addressed, and we have to just be prepared for what's on the other side of that, because I believe that we are in a very pivotal moment, and some of these things are happening because we need to know. There are, you know, I'm very close to education and very close to even what my kids are experiencing day to day, but never this close, right? So this is really an opportunity for us to be able to know, or at least have a little bit of a window into the experiences that our child and children have on a daily basis, and how can we support each other, right? And understanding that that's difficult work. And so we need to be able to advocate for those channels to be open, to have those difficult conversations. If we witness something, what's the best way of reporting that without there being retaliation on a child? You know, those are the things that we need to be looking at, in my opinion. But yeah.
I think that's an incredibly important observation, that, you know, it's coming into your home in a way that you've never seen it before. It's coming into folks' homes in a way that we have not seen or been exposed to, which could help open up some dialogue, but it could also help really open your eyes to some even larger problems that were there that we had no idea about. Rainie, I think you were going to jump in.
Oh, I was just giving an amen. I agree wholeheartedly with, and working internally in a school system, looking at the data and just observation, it is a huge issue that I've been very disappointed at. Is this recorded? At the way it's been addressed, or not been addressed in our district to date. Yeah.
And I would add, Rainie, you know, it's not just the internal piece of the system, right? It's the internal piece of our human nature that we have to begin to, you know, kind of check, look at, evaluate. We have to do that inner work. You know, otherwise we'll just stay right where we are. And it's funny because you guys are absolutely right. I think that what this has done is brought conversations about that we've been sweeping under the rug or not really knowing how to have, and now it's bubbling up to the top. You know, not to call anybody out, but right now I'm sitting at Sacred Heart Academy. Kudos to them and their leadership for acknowledging that these conversations are important. They need to figure out how they support the students who look like me in the midst of trying to learn and deal with being Black in America. And this is just where we are. It's where we've been, you know, trying to have these conversations about just how challenging it is to wake up and face the day. And it is constant survival mode or code switching or trying to figure out how you fit in. And it is, that's trauma all in itself, that you cannot, be who you naturally are. I don't have that problem. But at the same time, trauma seems to, be something that we carry with us. And so I just want to continue to lift, trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, and how that is going to start, or if it already hasn't, well, it already has, start to play out in our community. And so while folks are quick to rush to Black on Black crime or in heightened crime in West Louisville, or why are people shooting people, they are in survival mode. If we want to get into some real scientific terms, their amygdala has completely been hijacked. It is no longer a matter of fight or flight. It's fight. And so when you turn on that and when you activate that, it is a matter of, in the moment, very impulsively, having to make decisions that is for, it could be a matter of life or death. And so what I tend to look at, especially in the midst of this COVID, is how are we treating one another? How are we talking with others who are not experiencing the same things that we are? I have conversations with a ton of people because they're sympathetic, but they want to, kind of connect for a deeper level of understanding. And I appreciate that, because that's the only way we're going to be able to move forward in this, is to get to a place of understanding. Now, when we talk about, how this is impacting, how this trauma is impacting our students and families, it's the same deal. How do you expect a student to learn when their cousin just got shot last night, or we might not necessarily know where we're living because rent is way past due and we got 3 eviction notices and there's no policy in place that's going to keep us in our home? What about our lights, And then, and it's so crazy because our kids are forced to grow up faster than most children. And so our kids are worried about, how's mom going to pay LG&E? And if LG&E isn't working, how am I going to get online and learn? I mean, there's just so much layered on to what we can even imagine. And so I press upon this group to find ways to, cater to social emotional learning in a different kind of way. Ask a student, how are they doing? And then ask them how they're doing for real. Ask them, is there anything that you could do to be helpful? Whether that is, buy a meal for the family that night, or, kind of collect some funds to make sure that their LG&E does stay on. I know there's a host of resources, but in the midst of trauma, folks are having like a panic, like they don't know who to call. And so the better we can make this information available and easily accessible, the better off we'll be. And this is not a matter of posting it on your Instagram or your Twitter page, because I can guarantee you the families that need it the most are not on Twitter. They're not on Instagram. And so we have to be creative in, who do we get this in the hands of? Who can get this in the hands of the people who need it the most? I think I'll stop there.
Ebony, you brought up some really tangible ways in which people can take action. And that really gets to, one of the questions that we had around, what can organizations or community members or schools do to create supportive environments? You talked about, taking over a meal. That's something that we always tell, we always recommend to families to help reduce stress on new parents. You take over a meal. Well, maybe it's not just new parents, it's just parents in general. But what are some other ways in which organizations or community members or schools can create those environments? And Kish, I know that Louisville Urban League, the initiative to partner with community organizations might be a good example of that. If you want to talk a little bit about what you all are doing in that space.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, Ebony hit on a really great point about the tangible ways to make things happen. Like sometimes when we get caught up in the policy and the, you know, that takes time to move, right? And so there are things that we can do right now that need to be done right now. And so, you know, when we look at, I don't know, March 13th is just the day in my mind as to when things completely changed for most families. And knowing that, we have been at the league anyway in this space of trying to kind of build out this trajectory of, okay, so what does this mean moving forward? If we know that we're in this space and we may continue to be in this space, how are we going to build supports for our students? And how can we do that in a way that's, you know, citywide and collective and all of those things? And so we had reached out a while back in June, I guess, specifically when we found out that there were these different ways that we may return to school. And knowing that one of the options would be possibly remote learning if there was in-person instruction, we knew that for some families that would not be an option, right? And so that's an obvious equity gap. And so we were really intentional about asking, okay, so what resources would you all have from the district to be able to support community? Because that's what community does, right? There's no innovation around, you know, like, oh, these community learning hubs. No, this is just what community organizations do. They respond to the needs of their families that they're working with. And so knowing that that was going to be a real need if students were going to be at home or not in school, where will they be during the school day? And so the main issue at this point is that we're not even talking about the limited capacity that a lot of our out of school time providers and churches and community centers had before. Is even more restricted, right? Because we're in this pandemic. So they're not even really able to serve in total the families that they were and kids that they were reaching before. So there's a greater need to have more organizations, more churches, and, you know, to step up, and individuals to step up and say, how can I help? And so there are a wide array of ways that you could help, you know, and some of those things we've helped to kind of, you know, galvanize with Evolve 502's rapid response team. And Ebony's been a huge part in that process of trying to get the things going, right? And so one of the issues I think that we have in community sometimes is coming together, right? We have this collective thread, but coming together and figuring out how we can pool our resources in a way that is most beneficial to the community is always a heavy lift. But it's the lift that we have to do right now, because we cannot afford to see more of what we know it was already the narrative of this, you know, achievement gap or opportunity gap, whatever you want to call it, and that just deepening as we go out through this. And so I think part of our concern right now is that we speak equity, but we don't do equity, right? Like, it's imperative that we get to this place of understanding what that really means. So even, I know, Rainie, you mentioned the mental health practitioners in Lexington, Fayette County Schools, and we had the same kind of effort a year or so ago of having every school gets a mental health practitioner, you get a mental health practitioner, you get one, and that's not equity, right? Like, if we're really thinking about what that means, we're looking at the collective pool of our schools. We're looking at the demands of which schools have the most pertinent, salient issues, caseload, whatever, and then we're allocating that way. If we're talking about co-creation, we're looking at a bigger picture of saying, okay, who's already in the school that's supposed to be meeting these needs that maybe they're not able to do it because they've been handed off all these other responsibilities. And I will speak and put my school counselor hat on right now and say, I know there are a lot of school counselors that are frustrated, highly frustrated, because they've gone to school, put in their time to be a school counselor, to be that mental health practitioner that is coming into the building, and that's their sole job. and the school counselor's pushing papers. You see what I'm saying? So like, that's not even going to be the best use of your collective resources, because that school counselor's feeling some type of way. So she or he is not at their optimal level of input into the collective picture, right? Because they're feeling like, you know, well, dang, that's what I went to school for. I'd actually like to be doing that. And so we just have to be more intentional about speaking up and speaking out, and being okay with not being liked and people calling you whatever. Because if it's going to move the needle in ways that impact our students and pushes for positive outcomes, we have to do that. We have to do that work. And so that's where we are at the league anyway, is really trying to get everybody to help with this co-creation of how are we supporting our students? How are you plugging in? So whether it's maybe you have a space that was being used for something pre-COVID that is dormant now, that you're able to open to 10 students to come during the day, any of that is helpful. And this Evolve 502 is helping to coordinate those resources where somebody's saying, you know what, I'd be interested in volunteering to be a tutor. I can be there for 2 hours at a site. That, we would love that. Like, please contact so that we can get all of these pieces together, because I think as we continue to grow, this will build out. And we're just hoping that there will be buy-in from the city, and eventually that state funds would be able to support. So, you know, that we can't wait for that, because we have very real issues right now. So it's all about being strategic and trying to do the best with what we have while advocating for more.
I will say one thing we have done well at the elementary level is staff based on that need. But middle and high, it's not that way at this point. I totally agree. I've been in the role of a school counselor, and it is misused, and that really happens at the school level. And so I've been advocating for that since I discovered that role was so screwed up. You become the assessment coordinator and the Social Security document filer, and so that is the other part of my role, is I'm the school counselor's contact at the district level. So we will amen to that. One of the things you all mentioned about community, and something we've been really trying to push, and my colleague Hadia Massey has developed this with the input of some other folks, but is having a really structured mentoring program where every kid in a school is assigned to someone in the school, and that parent and student know who to call. Because just like you said, knowing who to contact, that's overwhelming when you can show up at the building and ask, or call and there's a building full of people. So having that very structured, where there's an individual connection, and it doesn't have to even be deep initially, but just how are you doing? No, how are you really doing? So giving them some questions, giving the school strategies for how to assign those kiddos. But we also have rolled out, we were already doing it anyway, but the timing couldn't be better, social emotional learning instruction. But we've had our teachers are receiving additional training about really approaching that instruction and that curriculum through an equity lens. I think that's going to look different and be at varying levels this first year, but also using that time to have every middle school and high school will have advisory periods, which is kind of like class meetings, but in older kid terms, and then class meetings at the elementary level. So that daily there's an opportunity to connect with the community, because one of the things we know about trauma, regardless of the source, is that connection and relationship is the best antidote to that. And right now they can't have any of that. So we've tried to think of ways where we could structure things. My biggest concern, honestly, is once the ball gets rolling, are our school level leaders going to hold people accountable for keeping that going? There's structures there, but are we going to adhere to them? Because once it gets going, the academic pressures that shift in mindset of if we don't have our Maslow before Bloom, that if we don't have our emotional and social needs being met, if we don't have our basic needs for safety and security and feeling respected for who we are, we're not going to want to learn. We're not going to be as invested in learning from you because you don't respect who I am, or I don't have the things I need. So we're going to keep pushing from our student support services department. We're a tiny little department in a huge district, but you were absolutely right. I think this pandemic and then a summer of racial tension have just brought to light issues that have been there for, well, centuries, but definitely through my entire career. So it's an opportunity to, now that people see those and perhaps are hearing those for the first time. I mean, I know I've been doing some personal work and reading and trying to just listen, but it's really a challenge for everybody at this point. That's what I would say is let's embrace this moment and really use it to catapult change individually and at systems levels as well.
Yeah.
Rainie, I appreciate you mentioning both the systems level and the individual level. And I think that what I would love to hear from each one of you is what's one thing that you would ask on a systems level, a policymaker, a decision maker, to commit to effectively respond to trauma? And then what is one thing every person on this forum can do to commit to responding to trauma appropriately? So policy, like Kish said, it's slow, but we need to be thinking about those things, but also in the immediate, on the individual level, what can we also do?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Shannon, because I wrote down that, COVID really gave us permission to pause and pay attention to the things that Rainie said has, as she said, it's been happening forever. And the thing about it is, we haven't had an opportunity to slow down and really pay attention to, like, as a collective. Like, there, of course, are people, social workers and things of the like, that pay attention to inequities across the board at individual and systems levels. But, for all of us to really pause and pay attention to either how you individually are, showing up, but then also, when we go to our respective workplaces, what are some of the things that just haven't made sense? You don't understand. Somebody else has probably just been doing it for a long time and they think it's okay, or they think it's right and it's not. Those are the things in which we need to be making note of and figuring out who is the person high enough to begin to say, hey, this is inequitable. This doesn't serve everyone in the same way, and begin to have those really deep conversations. I'm inspired by the young people of this movement currently, because they are begging for us to lean in a little bit more, and not just for people who look like me, but for everybody to really lean in and start to have these conversations that have been needing to happen for a very long time. I cannot begin to tell you how many times, how many committees or, tables I've sat at where we're developing, really cool guidelines for how we're going to move forward. But yet it sits as a pretty document and there's no action behind it. And so I really press people to hold themselves accountable and hold the entities in which you're affiliated accountable, and then lean in on this political landscape. Like, I don't do politics for real, but I do know that those are the ones who are in position to be making, they're in decision-making positions, and so for us to collectively come together and be on one accord and stand in the gap, and bring young people along because they have experience, they have a voice to share. And I just think that some of this is a matter of beginning the conversation and doing a whole bunch of follow-up, because it's not just like you could just have the conversation one time. And I can almost guarantee you that there are not enough people saying, oh yes, and here's what came out of that conversation, and here's what we need to do next. Most conversations end with, oh, this was really good, I learned a lot. But what are the next steps? Like, we need to be, writing down, okay, what can I do and who can I reach out to help bring them into the fold, and really begin to, as Kish had alluded to, sometimes we think we're in community, but there ain't no unity in community. And so everybody's just doing their own thing, and it's just not working. It's what has happened, and it is not working. Clearly, we're having this conversation still today. And I also think that there has to be a way in which we talk to funders, we talk to those who are friends with heavier pockets, and get them to redirect some of their giving percentages, right? We have to create sustainable ways in which we can support, fund the things that need to happen. Trainings, strategic plannings, all of the things that we know are going to create a change down the line. Because right now, folks are just throwing money, and I think that there are some people who have received enough money to do the immediate. But what about the long-term goal, right? Like, yes, people are hungry. Yes, let's send all the food to West Louisville. We know that is great. But what is going to happen beyond the, oh, I feel bad because little Cece didn't eat last night? Like, we've got to get beyond that and begin to think about, well, how can we help Cece's family, get a good livable wage paying job with some benefits? How can we assist in that vein and create some more sustainable funding streams that will help, since we're talking about equity, help close this gap that has existed for Black and brown people ever since redlining? And that's where I'll stop. Oh, and if you didn't know about redlining, it's a whole thing. Like, if you don't know about redlining, put that on your list right now. You gonna Google redlining, look at the report, look at the map, and then Sacred Heart Academy, just because I'm sitting here, will host Josh Poe at the end of September virtually, so that he could walk you through his jaw-dropping presentation of how this has impacted all communities in Louisville.
I can say I have a degree in history, and never once did I learn about redlining, so I have learned about it recently, but it's infuriating the way that those kinds of things have been hidden. So for me in policy, I would say that the systems with which I interact the most, I'm a former foster parent, so our protective services, I've worked in schools for years, and mental health before that these services that really can help create equity, can help support families rather than and support individuals, and are underfunded, are expected to do more with less. And so that would be my big advocacy thing is if you're going to ask our social services, our schools, our mental health agencies to help individuals, we've got to have the funding and support to do that. But from a personal level, I feel and have felt compelled as an individual, and also in working with my colleagues to do the same, to just do a lot of those uncomfortable conversations and self-reflection and reading and listening, and to learn how you can no longer, it's easy to think of myself, I'm an ally, but am I really going to get in there and get my hands dirty? And so where do I fit in that puzzle, and really reflecting on that and starting to see how I've benefited from privileges, and not recognized the ways in which, like redlining is an example. It just because no one taught me about it doesn't mean I don't need to learn all of the historical trauma and racial trauma that the individuals with whom I work have experienced. And so I just challenge everybody to do that work on their own. That's been what I've engaged in over the summer and will continue to engage in for myself. And it's been eye-opening, and I think really deepened relationships I have with people of color as well. So that's where I would start.
And I would just echo what Ebony and Rainie just shared. Flipping Hamilton, one of the mantras in there about, smile, talk less, smile more. Flipping that and saying, when you're in these meetings and you're at these tables, smile less, talk more. I can't tell you how many Zooms I've been in where I'm vocal about what needs to be done for our kids, and then I get the sidebar private chat. Thanks, Kish, appreciate you saying that, and and it's like, use your voice, help to amplify what needs to be done. So there's power in collective voice, and it's not just those people talking about those people because they're those people. So I would really encourage everybody to do that. And then on the other side of that with youth, to listen more, right? To really be able to tune in to where they are and how they're feeling, what they would recommend, right? Because the answers are there. I mean, they have the answers. We just don't bring them to the table. And so I would say even using your power to do that, if you can, is, really trying to bring more youth to the table. Even in meetings like this, we can invite youth in to have youth voice instead of kind of having that as, that's our charge, that's our love, but not really understanding the power that they have to be able to advocate for themselves. So that's all I got. And thank you.
Before we leave, I do have to say this, right? And we talk about the interpersonal work and also, the systems work that needs to be done. When you talk about the trauma, and you talk about the systems of historical trauma, from slavery all the way to Jim Crow and the prison industrial complex, a lot of trauma has been experienced, and we did not create it by ourselves. And so, one of those big tasks that, you may want to make note of is, how can you lean in and join in this fight to really dismantle some of these systems that continue to traumatize and oppress certain populations of our community?
Thank you for that, and thank you to our panelists. I think Courtney Downs with Kentucky Youth Advocates is going to close us out.
Yeah, so just I'll try to wrap up pretty quickly, but thank you so much to Dr. Kish and to Rainie and to Ebony for joining us today, and for really articulating the complexities and the daily lived realities that people are facing in this dual pandemic, and for asking, how are we treating one another when the lived experiences of some don't necessarily resonate in other people's lives, and taking it one step further to ask how children who are experiencing trauma, and frankly have been since even before the pandemic, whether it's because of homelessness or food insecurity or structural violence, just asking them how they're really doing. We heard a lot about recognizing the urgency of the needs that many of them have, and how that impacts young people in and out of the classroom. But then we also heard about opportunities for thinking outside the box and taking those steps to actually support students in new or different ways right now. And then also just the importance of all of us doing the work personally, listening to young people, and collectively using our voices at every opportunity to keep this work moving forward, because it's just too important for us not to do that. So thank you all so much for joining us today and for sharing all of that. Next week, we are going to be talking about elections and electoral advocacy. So if you missed it or you joined us late, it is election season. So we are going to be joined by Secretary of State Michael Adams, and he is going to be talking about what we can expect during this year's unprecedented election. And we will also talk about what you can do to engage candidates around policies that are related to kids. And we will also be talking to you about a new electoral advocacy toolkit that we will be launching this week as well. So as always, we will send out the RSVP link with next week's forum, along with the recording of this forum, and then also any links to the Action Hub and other resources in a follow-up email for everyone who is here with us today. And thanks again, everyone, for joining, and have a great day.